This is a face of a man who, by pure coincidence and a split-second decision, went from the local weirdo to one of the most disgusting and prolific serial killers in Czech history. His criminal record spans over 16 volumes filled with 127 crimes. So let me tell you, after what you hear today, you will never look the same at your neighbors again. And so now let's get right into it. March 17 of 1957 was another busy day at the Libušín quarry. But for one particular collier, it was time to punch out for the day. This man suffered a minor injury earlier that day, and eventually this became too painful for him to be able to carry out his duties, and so he decided it was time to go home. So he walked over to the locker area, where he was going to quickly change and put away his tools. But when he reached the room, he was immediately frozen in his tracks. He could see another worker in there, and that man was going through his fellow workers' clothes and pockets, clearly stealing their belongings. So the collier yelled at the thief to stop and then went on to grab him and brought him to the supervisor. The police were called and the thief was brought in for questioning. This man was already known to the police from having stolen before, and so a pair of officers went on to search his flat. And what they found inside absolutely shocked them. But it would also help the police solve the serious crimes and murders they didn't even think they would ever get to solve themselves. The flat was practically filled with stolen items, from more expensive items like radio to completely mundane items like cooking utensils. However, the officers also found two items that really helped them to break their cases wide open. Shoved into a workbench together with a woman's watch was a 7.65mm Walther revolver, which could potentially match the murder weapon used at several unsolved crimes. And lying in a bathroom was a Niazi razor, which had been reported as stolen from the latest crime scene that has also not been solved yet. These items really put the thinking of these officers into high gear, and so they collected these and several other items as potential evidence and brought it back with them to the station. They immediately submitted the gun for a ballistic test, and in the meantime they wanted to have a word with the thief again. The thief, aka Václav Mrázek, came from a very poor family of 14 and lived in an abandoned train. He never finished school, and so his only so-called chance of providing for his family was to steal, and so during his questioning he explained just that. He had already ended up in jail for 18 months when he was just 24 years old, but now at 32 years of age, he claimed that he was a reformed man. He had a new steady job, and according to his neighbors and ex-partners, he sort of just kept to himself and was seen as a hard worker. Nobody thought he would cause any trouble or that he was in any way seen as dangerous. Only some people did describe him as a bit weird at times and really tight with money, but that was about it. But the officers were not convinced, and so they kept Mrazek in for more questioning, at least until the ballistic report came back. The test was completed just 3 days after the initial search of Mrazek's flat, and so on the night of 21st of March 1957, the results were brought into the interrogation room where Mrazek was currently being questioned again. The officers held the man for many long hours and were relentless with their questions and accusations. But so far, Mrazek had denied any involvement in any of the unsolved cases the police presented him with. However, when the officers told him that his gun was clearly linked to the murders, Mrazek knew that it was obvious that there was no point in lying anymore. He put his hand into his hands and started sobbing. Eventually, he would start confessing to all his crimes, and so here is a reconstruction of what this seemingly quiet and hard-working neighbor had done. Mrazek started by explaining that due to his upbringing, himself and his brother had to start stealing food to get by. One of the largest hauls was 400 eggs, 200 packets of butter, and a large wheel of cheese. Other times he would steal rabbits and hens. But Mrazek wanted more from life, and so he decided to join the humanitarian organization called UNRRA in Romania and Bulgaria. UNRRA stands for the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, which operated from 1943 to 1947, and provided aid to countries affected by the Second World War. Mrazek was part of the armed forces that marched with the convoy to ensure they would not be attacked, and this is where he learned how to use a gun. Mrazek also confessed that his team members of the armed squad were often cruel and twisted, And so to pass the time, they fired at civilians passing by and laughed when those people tried taking cover and running away from the bullets. While working with the squad, Mrazek also witnessed some abnormal sexual practices and said that it was standard for him to have sex up to 4 times a day, mainly with young women. He also explained that this was the first time he came across pornographic books, and so he really took a liking to reading those. After his 18 months in jail, Mrazek's friend offered to sell the thief a gun, a 7.65mm Walther revolver. Apart from the gun, Mrazek also bought himself a bunch of ammunition so he would be stocked up for a while, but Mrazek didn't end up using the gun for some time. On 22nd August 1951, Mrazek was riding his bike around Chomutov in Czechoslovakia. This was one of the Mrazek's favorite activities, but lately he had been doing it for another reason. Every time he saw a woman walking on her own and seemingly helpless, he would get excited and aroused. And it was getting to the stage where Mrazek would get painful headaches, and so he decided that he could no longer go on without doing anything about his urges. And so on that day, Mrazek was just riding around the town when, alongside the river Ohre, he spotted a young girl ushering a small herd of cows. Mrazek immediately felt that urge kick in again, and so he rushed over to the girl, jumped off the bike, grabbed a piece of wood that was lying nearby, and jumped at the girl. The girl, who was a 15-year-old Hanna Chlobova, didn't see Mrazek coming, and so she was completely taken aback by this. She tried pushing Mrazek off, but even though he didn't look it, he was much stronger than her, and so he overpowered her and brought her to the ground in mere seconds. There, Mrazek took that piece of wood he had picked up only a few moments ago, and he started hitting Hanna's head with it. And only after a few heavy hits, Mrazek heard a crack as Hanna's skull gave in, and the girl's body went limp. But killing the girl did not satisfy Mrazek as much as he thought it would, and his excitement was not going away. And so the killer decided to also sexually assault the teenager's lifeless body. When Mrazek finished, he dragged the body into the nearby bush and just left it there. Only a few weeks later, on the 16th of September 1951, Mrazek knew that he wanted to kill again. But unlike the last time, he wanted to make sure that everything would go smoothly, and so before he headed out, he grabbed his Walther gun. His revolver made him feel extremely confident and so much stronger, like nothing would ever be able to stop him. And then, all he needed to do was find himself yet another victim, which unfortunately wouldn't take him long to do. Mrazek spotted a woman walking along the main street. This was a 32-year-old Bronislava Pajurkova, and because she missed her bus, she decided to start walking home. When Mrazek saw that woman all alone, he felt his excitement grow again, and so he pulled out a gun and fired 3 times at Bronislava. Mrazek managed to hit the woman in her torso and kill her immediately. And seeing her topple like that made him even more excited. Mrazek ran over to the woman's body, and because this was a highly frequented street, he dragged her away into the shadows where he sexually assaulted her. When yet again Mrazek was finished, he made sure that he stripped the dead woman of her belongings and then disposed of her body into the nearby Bilina River. And this is exactly where she was then found the following morning by a few young guys walking to school. This crime sent the whole village into a state of frenzy. Crimes like these didn't really happen around there, and so everyone was really scared that they could be the next victim, especially the women. Practically every single man was thought to be the potential killer, no matter their age, and soon enough the police started calling them in one by one for an interrogation. But this led the officers to nothing, and so for the time being, just like with the previous victim Hanna, this case went on to remain a mystery. Just a month later, Mrazek went on to attack a girl named Anna Shestakova as she was walking along the local lake. Mrazek leapt at the girl from behind, turned her around, and stabbed at her neck. The blade didn't go through her neck but struck her cheek instead and got lodged in her jaw. This really surprised Mrazek, and so for a moment he lost his focus, and that's all the girl needed. She pushed Mrazek away from her, which made him stumble backwards, trip, and collapse on the ground. Anna started sprinting away from her attacker, who luckily remained stunned, and so he didn't chase after her, so the girl managed to escape. A few weeks later, Mrazek was ready to strike again, and so equipped with his knife, he started roaming the streets until he saw a woman named Edna Mainlova walking near the local factory. As it was very dark and there were very few streetlights, Mrazek waited in the shadows, and as Edna was passing him by, not knowing he was there, he jumped in front of her and started stabbing her in her stomach. But because Edna had a very thick coat on, The knife didn't manage to penetrate it deep enough, and so the woman didn't get seriously injured and was able to get away from Mrazek and run away to safety. After these 2 failed attempts, Mrazek decided that next time he would take his revolver again. He waited just over half a year for his next attack, but on the 1st of June 1952, Mrazek thought it was time to go out and hunt again. And as he was walking around the town, he came across a pub where there was a party happening, and so Mrazek could see all the people through the window having a great time, and he was particularly interested in looking at the girls who were all dancing around. And so Mrazek waited for his turn. As people were slowly exiting the party, he stole a bike he found nearby the pub and started riding around the area, looking for his next victim. And soon enough, Mrazek saw a young woman leaving the pub on her own. This woman was named Elena Marmanova and was just 19 years old at the time. Mrazek immediately pulled his gun out, and riding full speed towards the woman, he shot at Elena. The bullet missed the girl and went through her collar of the jacket instead, and so Mrazek swore and fired another shot, but that missed as well and ended up going through the layer of the girl's jacket instead. At this point, Mrazek was so frustrated, but also aroused, that he tried firing the gun for the 3rd time, but it jammed. And with all of this excitement he had inside him, it also made him ejaculate. And so now, no longer interested in Elena, Mrazek pushed the woman away from him and told her to get lost. However, this was not the end of Mrazek's night. A little while later, he spotted another young girl leaving the pub. This was a 16-year-old Maria Dvorakova, who had arranged for a friend to pick her up after the party and drive her home. And so, as the girl was walking towards the meeting spot, Mrazek waited until the girl was far away enough from everyone else, and then fired at her. Unfortunately, this bullet didn't miss its target, and Maria fell to the ground dead. The killer then picked the lifeless body up and carried it over behind a nearby wall, and then that's where Mrazek sexually assaulted her. After this, Mrazek waited a full 2 years before he struck again. On 14 July 1954, a 16-year-old student, Jiřina Helmichova, was walking towards her boyfriend's place. Unfortunately, Mrazek was already tailing her, and when he called after her, the girl turned around to face him, at which point Mrazek pointed his gun at her and shot her straight in her face, killing her instantly. After he moved her body into the tall grass, he again sexually assaulted her. Mrazek waited yet another year before his next killing spree. On a warm evening of 9th August 1955, Mrazek headed out with his gun again, hoping to find yet another victim. He came upon a young couple, a 19-year-old Libusha Duvkova and a boyfriend, a 26-year-old Karel Terlify. Mrazek got immediately aroused by the idea of striking them both, and so he first fired 3 shots at Karel, who unfortunately had no way of protecting himself or his girlfriend, and so he fell to the ground dead. Mrazek then shot once at Libusha, who was trying to run away, but she too would be killed on the spot. And just like with his previous victims, Mrazek sexually assaulted the woman's lifeless body and robbed both corpses of all their belongings, even the small change they had on them. There were now 6 unsolved murders, where the police were completely out of any evidence or clues. However, one of the victims that managed to get away, the 19-year-old Elena, did give a very basic description to the police, and so they could start a large-scale investigation. And for the first time in Czech history, a special team was put together just to aid this investigation and move it further. They would interview over 25,000 men from the area and the places nearby, but Mrazek was able to evade them. He of course knew that the police were looking for him at that point, and so he moved away and changed jobs. He started working at the quarry, however one of his supervisors, named Ladislav Beran, made him work in a particular humid area, and so Mrazek ended up getting a pneumonia and was unable to work for a while. And because Mrazek was particularly motivated by money, this didn't really sit well with him, and he blamed Beran for basically cutting his earnings by not being able to work due to his illness. And so as revenge, Mrazek decided to rob Beran. On the night of 9th of November 1956, Mrazek crept towards his supervisor's house, which was only a few streets away from his own flat. He knew that Beran would be at work, and so Mrazek's plan was just to get in, steal as much as he could find and carry, and then swiftly get out again without anyone seeing him. As Mrazek got into the yard, he found an axe propped against the wall, and so he grabbed it and used it to open the door. But as Mrazek was looking around the house for what he could steal, he entered the main bedroom of the house, where he found Beran's wife Alžběta. The woman woke up and yelled at Mrazek to get out, but he just ran towards the screaming woman and started clubbing her with the axe. All this commotion managed to wake Beran's 10-year-old granddaughter, who came in running into the bedroom only to find her grandmother lying in the bed in a pool of her own blood. Mrazek stood up, covered his face with a handkerchief, and asked the little girl to help him find cash and other valuables. The girl started crying and said that she didn't know where those things could be, and so, annoyed that his plan didn't work, Mrazek grabbed several items he thought could be of some worth, like the Nazi razor. And then, before leaving the place, he sexually assaulted the little girl. At this point, the police had everything they needed to close those 7 cases. One of the main reasons they had never found Mrazek was the fact that his description provided by Elena was rather vague, and also the fact that he kept changing his modus operandi, meaning he never killed in the same manner like most serial killers do. This led the police to believe that there could be multiple killers, which slowed the whole operation down. For his crimes, Mrazek stood by the court on 5th of November 1957, where he was found guilty of 7 murders, 4 attempted murders, 14 sexual assaults, and other petty crimes, making his final record to be astonishing 127 crimes. Just 4 days later, the court was ready to announce their verdict, and so Mrazek was sentenced to death by hanging. The verdict was then confirmed by a higher court at the beginning of December, and Mrazek's attempt to appeal his sentence was denied. When Mrazek was still held in prison awaiting his sentence, he actually tried committing a suicide by smashing his head into a concrete wall. But apart from fracturing his skull, he didn't manage to actually do any major damage to himself. And so on the 29th of December 1957, Mrazek's neck was fitted with a noose, and then at 2:52 p.m. he was hanged. The originally scheduled time was actually to be 2 p.m., but because of an argument between the officials where they were discussing who was and was not allowed to witness the execution, the time had to be pushed back. Mrazek's body was then removed at 3:02 p.m. and placed into the morgue, where a death mask was made. This was followed by an autopsy where a piece of his brain, heart, and adrenal glands were removed. Then, Mrazek's body was transported and eventually cremated. His ashes were marked as top secret and stored away until the 26th of May 1961, when they were finally destroyed.